Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Ayin Bet. Today we are continuing a discussion that we started with the Mishnah on the previous daf. Yesterday we made a nice, tidy structure. Today we're going to challenge it, mess it up a little, but we'll end up in a good place as well. So the Mishnah recorded two controversies. The first one was about a sale, and then the next one was about hekdesh, consecration. Regarding a sale, is a seller generally generous or stingy? That was a machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan. This machloket was about the land itself. Both, in other words, both agree that if I say I'm selling you land, that does not include the wine press or the cistern. I'm definitely keeping that for myself. So Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan here are pretty close together, that I'm not being very generous, I'm only giving you the land. The question was only regarding a pathway. I'm keeping the cistern. Do I keep a pathway also to it? Rabbanan say, yes, I'm stingy and I'm keeping a pathway. Rabbi Akiva says, when I sell the land, I sell all of the land, and therefore I have to buy back a pathway as well. This machloket would apply also to trees. If I'm selling you land and I'm keeping some trees for myself, what about the land under the tree? Rabbi Akiva would say, I'm being generous and giving you all of the land, even the land under the tree. Rabbanan would say, since I'm keeping the trees, I'm keeping the land under the tree. That is machloket number one. Then, when it comes to, that was for a sale. For a gift, everyone agrees that a gift giver is generous. Not only regarding the land, but extra, very generous. A gift giver gives, when he says, I'm giving you land, he gives even the cistern and even the wine press. Okay, that's regarding gift. There's no disagreement there. There is a disagreement regarding consecration. Is a consecration, hekdesh, is that like a gift? That's what Rabbanan says. Or is it like a sale? That's what Rabbi Shimon says. So Rabbanan says, if I consecrate this land to hekdesh, then everything goes. The land, the cistern, the wine press, everything in the land goes. I don't keep anything for myself. Okay, that's very clear. This is consistent. This can be consistent with both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan, because both of them can say that when it comes to a sale, I'm holding something back, either holding the cistern back and the wine press, or even holding some of the land back, according to Rabbanan. But they can both agree that when it comes to consecration, then a person is generous and gives everything. So far, everything is consistent, and a consecration is like a gift, where also everyone would agree that you give everything. However, there is this opinion of Rabbi Shimon. I'll get to the as per Rabbanan later, because that's part of an answer of a question that we're going to have today. Rabbi Shimon says that someone who consecrates land is actually stingy regarding the wine press and the cistern. So therefore, you see, it's like a sale. So he's giving the land only and not those items. However, when he gives the land generously. In other words, Rabbi Shimon is similar to Rabbi Akiva regarding a sale. He thinks that consecration is like a sale, and it's like Rabbi Akiva's version of a sale, that I give all the land. Because I consecrate all the land and keep none for myself, if there are trees on the land, then the trees have to go also. Even though technically they're not included, they wouldn't be included in the sale, but because the trees get nourishment from consecrated land, because I'm giving all the land, so I have to give the trees as well, because how can I keep trees if they're getting nourishment from consecrated land? And so the trees go as well. Good. That was the Mishnah, two controversies. Then we have a statement of Rav Huna, and we try to figure out Rav Huna, who is he like? Like Rabbi Akiva, like Rabbanan? Let's see, what did he say? He says, if I sell 2 trees, then I'm being stingy. You get only the 2 trees, I keep all the land. But if I flip it around and I sell you the land, and except for 2 trees, I'm keeping the 2 trees for myself, I'm also stingy, and I keep the land under the trees. So in other words, there's a difference whether the land goes with the trees. If I'm giving you the trees, you only get the trees and I keep the land. But if I'm keeping the trees, and I keep the land as well. So we concluded yesterday that Rav Huna fits together with Rabbanan, this Rabbanan here, that a seller is stingy. Rav Huna is talking about a seller, and therefore a seller is always stingy. That makes perfect sense. Rav Huna would not fit with Rabbi Akiva, because according to Rabbi Akiva, if I sell you trees, I want to give you the land as well. I want to be generous. Or if I give you the land, then I would be giving you all the land, and I would keep only the trees without the land for myself. So we see that Rav Huna is consistent with Rabbanan. Good. Now, what about Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon, as I explained just now when I was explaining Rabbi Shimon, he fits together with Rabbi Akiva. That just, he says, consecration is like a sale. And just like in a sale, I keep for myself the wine press, but I give all the land. Well, who said that? That was Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So we see Rabbi Shimon, who is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that's Rabbi Akiva's student. So he would follow Rabbi Akiva that when someone consecrates land or sells land, then he's giving all the land and he's not keeping any for himself. That's how we concluded the daf yesterday. Everything is very nice. However, now we're going to quote a baraita. It's a pretty long baraita, but the point of the baraita is pretty simple. The baraita is talking about consecration, and it says that someone who consecrates trees does not consecrate the land that's under the trees, meaning that when it comes to consecration, one keeps the land for himself. If I consecrate the trees, doesn't include the land, a person is stingy regarding the land. Well, that's interesting, because whose opinion will that be? Who says that someone is stingy when it comes to consecration? Well, let's see. It's not going to be Rabbanan, because they say a person is so generous, you give everything, even the cistern. And actually, it also cannot be Rabbi Shimon, because even though he says you keep the cistern and the winepress, Rabbi Shimon says you give everything when it comes to consecration. So that's going to be our question. We're all going to bring in Rabbi Akiva Rabbanan also, because although they're talking about sales, they all agree that when it comes to consecration, a person is generous, and so we're going to have a problem and not be able to find any author of this baraita. Just to predict the answer, we're going to end up saying that Rabbi Shimon over here was only speaking as per Rabbanan. He says, according to you, you should agree with this. But Rabbi Shimon himself says that someone who consecrates is very stingy, not only regarding the cistern and the winepress, but even the land under the trees. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon can be the author of this baraita. All right, now that we have the nice outline in mind, let's see the case. Umi masit mukmat lad Rabbi Shimon ki Rabbi Akiva. Can you really say that Rabbi Shimon follows the same opinion as Rabbi Akiva? This is really just one way to ask the question, right? If Rabbi Shimon is like Rabbi Akiva, then that would mean that Rabbi Shimon thinks someone is generous regarding the land. Now, the truth is that you can see that from Rabbi Shimon's statement himself here, because that's his reason that you have to give the trees, is because he's generous regarding the land. So the following baraita is going to contradict Rabbi Shimon's own words. So not only is it a problem for connecting Rabbi Shimon with Rabbi Akiva, it's a problem for Rabbi Shimon himself. But the Gemara, because it just said this equation, is following up and asking it in that way. But actually, you can ask it even in a more fundamental way, this problem. Ve'atanya, hikdish shelosha ilanot mimata asara lebet se'ah. Hare hikdish et hakarka ve'et ha'ilanot shebenehem. If someone makes hekdesh 3 trees, and the trees are planted in a certain ratio. The ratio has to be where one of 10 trees that are planted in an area where you would sow 1 se'ah of seed. That is the proper ratio when it comes to an orchard, when you're planting trees. If there's more trees than that, then the trees won't be sustainable. You're going to have to cut some down, and therefore it's not a permanent planting. So that's not an orchard. And if it's fewer than that, that means it's just 1 tree here, 1 tree far away. That's not considered an orchard. They are just lone trees. And so we only call it an orchard if it's this precise ratio. Now you have 10 trees or however many, but it's in this ratio of 10 per bet se'ah, and you make hekdesh 3 or more of them. Then it's considered as if he made not only the trees themselves hekdesh, but also the land under it, because 3 is a crowd, 3 makes an orchard, and since it's called an orchard, one makes hekdesh the entire orchard, and that includes the trees, the land that's beneath it. Now, what's the difference? What does it matter? It matters when one comes to when it comes to redeem it. לפיכך, כשהוא פודה בית זרע חומר שעורים ב50 שקל כסף. So I made this hekdesh. Now the Bet HaMikdash, they don't need these actual trees in my field, right? And so who knows where it is. But the point is that I want to donate it, so the Bet HaMikdash can take it and they can sell it themselves. But the original owner has a right to buy it back, to redeem it. It's basically a way of saying, I want to donate this amount of money, and you do it in terms of making these trees hekdesh. The trees are actually hekdesh. You can't use them in the meantime, but if you pay the value of them, then they are redeemed. Now, here's important background. There are two different categories of redemption when it comes to land. If I consecrate, let's say, trees by themselves, just one tree or two trees, and I want to redeem it, then I go with the market value of those trees. How much are they worth? And then I have to pay the Bet HaMikdash that amount, and then I get the trees back. And that's for standard redemption for most items. However, the exception is an ancestral field, a field that I inherited from my father, inherited from his father, that the ancestral field. If I consecrate it, then I want to redeem it, there's a fixed value that's mentioned in the Torah. And the fixed value is for an area where you can sow a chomer, that's a cord of area, I redeem for 50 silver shekel. So that 50 silver shekel is for an entire yovel. So if I consecrate it at the beginning of a yovel cycle, right after yovel, and I redeem it right away, then I'm going to have to pay 50 shekel. However, if I wait a few years and redeem it, let's say in the middle, then I'll have to pay only 25. For each year that's left, I'll have to pay a silver shekel for every cord of land that I consecrate. It's a fixed value, and it doesn't matter whether this is very fertile land or not fertile land, whether it's worth more on the market or less on the market. So therefore, it's going to make a big difference. If I consecrate trees, just one or two trees, or they're in a different ratio, and then I redeem it. I just redeem the trees for market value. The land was never consecrated. If I consecrate at least three trees that are planted in this ratio, then the land also becomes consecrated. So therefore, when I come to redeem it, I pay the fixed value, and by doing that, I redeem the land and the trees that are on it as well. That's the beginning of the Baraita. Pachot mikan o yoter al ken, o shekdishan beze achar ze, hare ze lo ikdish lo hakarka velo et ha'ilanot shebenehem, lefichach keshu podeh et ha'ilanot beshovyehen. If the trees are planted in a lower ratio or higher ratio of density, that's not considered an orchard. Or if they are that same density, but I did only one, now I consecrated one at a time, not three or more together. In that case, the land does not become consecrated, nor do the other trees that are within the orchard, they don't become consecrated either. Therefore, when I want to come and redeem it, I only have to redeem the trees themselves, only the ones that I consecrated, according to the market value, and not any other trees, and not the land either. Velo od ela, afilu hikdish et ha'ilanot, vechazar v'hikdish et hakarka, keshu podeh et ha'ilanot beshovyehen, vechozeru podeh bet zera chomer seorim ba50 shekel kesef. And another chidush the Batra ends with, even if I made the trees hekdesh in a way that the land doesn't, so let's say I did one at a time, and then after that, right, I made a bunch of trees hekdesh. Then after that, on a separate statement, a separate occasion, I said, the land, I want to make the land hekdesh. So because it was not done at the same time, when I redeem it, I also have to redeem it separately. And so I have to redeem the trees and pay for their market value. And then I have to redeem and pay for the land according to the fixed value of the Torah for ancestral land. Like the trees can only be redeemed together with the land if I consecrated them all at the same time, and it was at least three, and I did it, and it's in that ratio, then they all get consecrated together, then I just have to pay for the land and the trees come along. But if I did the trees separately, the land does not come along with it. So that's the important point for us, that even though I consecrated the trees, the land under the trees does not become consecrated. What we see here is that someone who consecrates in a stingy way. I said trees, I meant only the trees, and the land does not come along with it. Only if it's 3 trees in this configuration, well then it's called an orchard. That's why the land automatically goes under it. But if it's just 1 tree, if I meant that the land comes with even 1 tree because I'm being generous, well then already that land should be together with the tree, and the next one also, and the next one also. So we see from that this baraita assumes that someone who consecrates is doing so in a stingy way. And if we translate it back to our case, certainly if I consecrate land, I'm not giving the cistern. I'm not even giving the land under trees. I keep the trees and I keep the land under the trees. And there was no opinion that we saw so far that thinks this. So that's what we ask. Maneh. Who's the author of this baraita? Is it Rabbi Akiva? Can't be. Rabbi Akiva says even a seller, who generally is more stingy than a gift giver and a consecrator, even a seller is generous and gives the land under the trees. All the more so a consecrator would be giving the land under the trees. It's true that they say that a seller sells in a stingy way and keeps the land under the trees, but Rabbanan agree that a consecrator is like a gifter and gives generously, gives all the land, even gives the wine press. Ela pishita Rabbi Shimon. Who's left? It must be Rabbi Shimon. All right, so let's analyze Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon alibad deman. I alibad Rabbi Akiva. Ha'amar mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher ve'kol sheken makdish. So Rabbi Shimon, remember, he was the most stingy when it came to consecration, because he says that when I consecrate land, then I am keeping for myself the cistern and the winepress. That's true, because so it's more like a sale. But when he says it's a sale according to whom? A sale like Rabbi Akiva? Well, that can't be, because according to Rabbi Akiva, in a sale, I'm selling generously and giving away the land, and so all the more so, a consecrator should also be giving the land. Ela peshita liba derabanan v'kasava Rabbi Shimon kol ki hechi democher ba'ayin ra'a mocher makdish nameh ba'ayin ra'a makdish u'meshayer ara. So therefore, must be that Rabbi Shimon, when he says that a consecrator is like a sale, it's like a sale that Rabbanan say. And Rabbi Shimon would say, just like a seller sells stingily and keeps land for himself, so too someone who consecrates does so stingily and keeps the land for himself. If this were true, then Rabbi Shimon could be the author of this baraita. The problem is that it doesn't work according to Rabbi Shimon's own words in the Mishnah. Vela kashya ho'il v'yonkin mesedeh hekdesh. His words in the Mishnah, as explained in a baraita that we quoted yesterday. Rabbi Shimon says, when I consecrate land, I keep for myself the cistern and the winepress. But because I'm giving away all the land, so I have to give the trees also. And Rabbi Shimon explained, why do I have to give away the trees? Because they are getting nourishment from the land. So which means I'm giving away all the land. So in other words, even Rabbi Akiva is generous when it comes to consecration of land, that the land goes with it. And therefore, nobody here in the Mishnah can possibly be the author of this baraita, because the most stingy is Rabbi Shimon when it comes to consecration, and even he says that all the land goes when you consecrate. When I give the land, all the land is consecrated. So one is generous. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon certainly would say in our baraita, in the case in our baraita, when I consecrate trees, the land under it also goes, because he says one is generous when it comes to giving land in consecration. And so now we have no one who can be the author of this baraita. Ela, now here's the answer. Rabbi Shimon ledivrehem de Rabbanan ka'amar lehu. Ledidi ki hechi de mocher ba'ayin ra'a mocher. Makdish name ba'ayin ra'a makdish. V'shure meshayer. Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah was not his own opinion. And even in the Baraita that we quoted yesterday, in which he explains his opinion in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Shimon was only according to Rabbanan. He was arguing with Rabbanan on Rabbanan's own terms. And he says as follows. Rabbi Shimon says, for me, my own personal opinion is that just like a seller is stingy even regarding the land, he keeps for himself the land that he needs, if it's under a tree or a path to a cistern, he keeps to himself. It's the same exact thing for a consecrator, also is stingy, and he keeps for himself the land. That is my opinion. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon himself can be the author of this Baraita, because he says that if someone sells a tree, he gives only the tree, keeps for himself the land. So too, if he consecrates a tree, he consecrates the tree only, not the land underneath. And that's what the Baraita that we read today says. Good. Now we have an author for our Baraita. Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah, this is what he meant. Ledidchu odu li miha telo hikdish ela harub hamurka v'sadan hashikma v'amri leRabbanan lashena. And Rabbi Shimon says, according to you, the Rabbanan, because Rabbanan over here were more stingy. They were very stingy. He says, so Rabbi Shimon says, you should agree with me that you shouldn't be so generous that a consecrator gives everything away, even the winepress. Since you say that a person is very stingy regarding a sale, and he's so stingy he keeps the winepress and even keeps the land and a pathway to it, so, okay, a consecrator is more generous, fine. So be a little bit more generous, and that means keep the winepress and give the land. In other words, Rabbanan, why don't you just go one step up and be like Rabbi Akiva when it comes to a consecration? That's what you should say. You don't have to jump all the way and say that a person's so generous that he gives away even the winepress and the cistern. So this is Rabbi Shimon arguing with Rabbanan on Rabbanan's own terms. He's saying it makes sense for Rabbi Akiva to go to the next step and give away everything. But for you, it's enough just to give away the land. Me personally, Rabbi Shimon says, I think that someone is stingy and keeps the land under the tree, even in a case of consecration. And then, V'amri leRabbanan lashena, and the Rabbanan themselves say to Rabbi Shimon, no, we don't agree with your evaluation of what we should think. We think that there is no difference between giving away the land and giving away the cistern. We think that when someone does hekdesh, he's super generous and gives away everything. So yeah, a sale, someone is super stingy, and a consecration, someone is super generous. And so we don't agree with your assessment that we should just go one step and be generous for the land, but not for the cistern. We are very generous. Rabbi Shimon himself, he never even agreed with that. Rabbi Shimon himself thinks that someone who consecrates is as stingy as someone who gives a sale. Good. Now that we established that the author of this Baraita is Rabbi Shimon, we're actually going to challenge that authorship from a different point. B'mai okim tala ke Rabbi Shimon ema sefa. We just established that this Baraita is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, but look at the last part of the Baraita. Ve'lo od ela afilu hikdish et ha'ilanot ve'chazar v'hikdish et ha'karka keshu podeh ta'ilan b'shovyehen ve'chozer podeh bet zera chomer seorim b'chamishim shekel kesef. Remember, the last part of that Baraita says that if someone consecrates the trees by themselves, let's say one by one, or if they're in the wrong ratio, too many or too little, and so then he makes hekdesh only the trees, and then after, at a second stage, he consecrates the land. When he comes to redeem it, he has to redeem them separately. He redeems the trees according to their market value, and then he redeems the land, which is ancestral land, according to the standard amount of the Torah, that for every zera chomer, he has to give 50 shekel, 1 shekel per year until the Yovel. Now, Rabbi Shimon lezel batar pidyon v'niparku agab ar'ayhu daha shaminan le Rabbi Shimon dazel batar pidyon. If Rabbi Shimon is the author of this Baraita, then we should follow the status of the land at the time of the redemption. Since we know that Rabbi Shimon always says we follow the status at the time of redemption. We're about to quote a long baraita that explains this point, how we know Rabbi Shimon follows the time of redemption. But let's explain what this means. It means that there's a difference between ancestral lands and purchased land. A purchased land, if someone consecrates it and then redeems it, goes by market value. Ancestral land that a person inherits after his father dies, and he consecrates it and redeems it, that goes by the standard amount of 50 silver shekel in the Torah. Now, how do you decide what it is? What if it has one status, let's say it's purchased land at the time that he consecrates it, but then he inherits it after, and so that means it's ancestral land at the time of redemption. So how do you judge what it is? Do you look at it at the time of consecration or at the time of redemption? In this case here, at the time of consecration, he consecrates the trees and the land separately, which means that if you follow the time of consecration, then you have to treat them separately and redeem them separately, because the trees he redeemed as just regular trees. However, if we look at the whole situation at the time of redemption, the trees and the ancestral land are both consecrated. So what's the difference if he consecrated them in two steps? Right now, let's take the picture at the time of redemption. And right now, at the time of redemption, both the ancestral land and the trees are consecrated. So therefore, we should be able to redeem them all together according to the standard value that the Torah says for ancestral land, and he shouldn't have to do it separately, because that's Rabbi Shimon's opinion in general, that we follow the time of redemption. Okay, that's our question. So, and since it's not true, since the Baraita says you have to redeem them separately, that means we're looking at evaluating the status of the trees and the land at the time of consecration, not at the time of redemption. And so Rabbi Shimon cannot be the author of this. All right, that's going to be the question from this Baraita. Now let's see what the case is that the Baraita talks about. Rabbi Shimon's going to be over here. Tanya. מניין לוקח שדה מאביו הקדישה, ואחר כך מת אביו, מניין שתהא לפניו כשדה אחוזה. How do we know that if someone buys a field from his father, and then he makes it hekdesh, and then his father dies, so it becomes an ancestral land eventually? But at first he bought it, so it's a purchased land. So at the time that he makes it hekdesh, it's a purchased land. And then when he redeems it, that's after his father dies, then it's an ancestral land. So how do we treat this? How do we know that we treat it as an ancestral land? Talmud Lomar, V'im et sedeh miknato asher lo misedeh achuzato. Sedeh she'en re'uya liyot sedeh achuza, yasta zo she're'uya liyot sedeh achuza. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda ve'Rabbi Shimon. We know from the pasuk, this pasuk is describing a purchased land, and says if the land is purchased and it's not from ancestral land, now that's an extra word. You could just say if it's purchased land. Why do you also have to say and it's not ancestral land? So we learn from this that it has no potential of ever being ancestral land. Then it's considered purchased land and you follow the market price. But we exclude something that potentially could be ancestral land. So in this case, the son bought it. Right now, yes, it is purchased land, but potentially, eventually, when the father dies, it will be ancestral land. And therefore, even though right now, when the time now that he makes it hekdesh, it is purchased, and the father did not yet, because father didn't yet die, he's still alive, and he died afterwards. Nevertheless, we learn from this pasuk that it is considered ancestral land for the purpose of this law. And when he redeems it according to the fixed value. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, which is a little bit different from Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir omer, minayin laloker sadeh me'aviv umet aviv, v'achar kach hidish, minayin sheteh lefanav kisdeh achuza. The order here is a little bit different from the order in the previous, according to the previous opinions. Rabbi Meir says, how do I know that? If a son buys land from his father, and then the father dies, and then he makes it hekdesh, how do I know that in that case it is considered ancestral land? You see that it's only considered ancestral land according to Rabbi Meir if he makes it hekdesh after the father dies. According to Rabbi Meir, if he buys it and then makes it hekdesh, like the Rabbi Shimon's case, if he buys it and then makes it hekdesh, and then the father dies, then that will be considered purchased land. According to Rabbi Meir, have to pay the market price. So he does not. So that Rabbi Meir disagrees in that case. He says only if the father dies first. So now it's ancestral land, and then he makes it ekdesh. How do I know that that's still considered ancestral land, even though originally he did buy it? So when it first came into his possession, it was purchased land. So Talmud Omar v'im et sedeh miknato asher lo misedeh achuzato sedeh shena sedeh achuzah yastaz. So again, this extra phrase comes to exclude land that is not ancestral land. This is excluded because it is ancestral land at the time that he makes it ekdesh. Even though he owned it already as from a purchase, nevertheless, now it's also ancestral land. And so in that case, but only in that case, according to Rabbi Meir, can we call it ancestral land. And this case that Rabbi Shimon was talking about, Rabbi Meir would say it's purchased land. Now, ve'ilu Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Shimon, hecha demet abi v'achar kach hikdisha la sirich hikera. Now, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, they're actually going an extra step farther than Rabbi Meir, than using a pasuk to learn an extra chidush, because in the simpler case, Rabbi Meir's case, where the father dies first and then he makes it ekdesh, it's already ancestral land because the father died. He makes it ekdesh. They don't even need a pasuk for that. They only need a pasuk for the more difficult case when he makes it hekdesh first and then the father dies. So minalehu, how do they know the simple case that they say, oh yeah, we know your case already. That's simple. We're going to use the pasuk for the extra case. Well, how do they know that simple case? If it's from this very pasuk, well then they should only interpret the pasuk as Rabbi Meir does. Rabbi Meir, he says, I have no preconceived notions, and this pasuk will teach me one law. That's it. I can't teach me two steps. Rather, it must be that according to the Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, they have a general rule that whenever you're going to redeem something, you look at its status currently at the time of redemption. And since at the time of redemption, we see, well, what kind of land is this? Oh, ancestral land. Okay, so then that's it. So the Rabbi Meir's case would be obvious because he made it hekdesh after the father died, and now he's coming to redeem it. And at the time of redemption, it's ancestral land. So what does it matter? The fact that originally before hand it was bought land, but now it's ancestral land. So they know to be in his case already. Therefore, the pasuk must come to teach me something above and beyond that. What's the above and beyond that? That even if he made it hekdesh first after when it was purchased, and then the father died, even so, when he comes to redeem it, it's considered ancestral land. Okay, this all is a proof that, according to the Rabbi Shimon, he assumes that we follow the time of redemption, and since that's true, if that's true, therefore, when we apply it back here, we should follow the time of redemption. At the time of redemption, this guy owns both the land and the trees, ancestral land and the trees upon it, and therefore he should be able to redeem it all at once and not in two steps. So that's the problem. This is not the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. We answer, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Le'olam be'alma Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Shimon la azli batar pijon. V'acha kera ashkachu u'derush. Im ken nichtob kera. V'im et mesedeh miknato asher lo achuzato, ina mesedeh achuzato. Mai asher lo misedeh achuzato. Et she'ena re'uya liot sedeh achuza, yasta zo she're'uya liot sedeh achuza. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explains, no, actually Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, in general, do not follow the time of redemption. Truth is, if they follow the time of redemption, then they wouldn't even need a pasuk even for the more difficult case, because at the time of redemption, the father had already died. So that would be that itself would be a simple case. That really doesn't matter. And Rabbi Shimon does not think, your assumption was wrong, he does not think that we always follow the time of redemption. Here, this pasuk, they're actually using for double duty. In general, they say you look at the time of consecration. And here, they looked at this pasuk and they actually can learn two things, because the pasuk could have simply said, im et sedeh miknato, or sedeh achuzato, but it has an extra mem, asher lo mi sedeh achuzato. So this whole phrase is extra, and the mem is also extra. And so from that we learn that which is not potentially can never be a ancestral land, that's what's considered acquired land. But if it can be potentially ancestral land, then this excluded from the category of acquired land. And even if he consecrates it at the time that the father is alive, since potentially he will eventually inherit it, therefore, it leaves that category and is considered ancestral land when he redeems it. So that, in fact, that's how we learn it from this, from the wording of the pasuk. But in fact, Rabbi Shimon thinks that otherwise we follow the time of consecration. And in the case of the Sefa, of that Baraita, the consecration was done in 2 stages, not in 1 stage, and therefore you have to treat the trees separately at market value and then redeem the land separately, which will be at according to the ancestral land fixed value. Amar Rav Huna, Haruv HaMurkav V'Sadana Shikma, Torat Ilan Alav V'Torat Karka Alav. Rav Huna teaches that a grafted carob tree, it's a carob tree that has grown sufficiently that then they would graft another branch on it. That means it's already up to a advanced stage and is important in and of itself. V'Sadana Shikma, and a sycamore tree that also has grown and you're already cutting off its branches. And so these are significant in and of themselves and not just part of the field. So Rav Huna teaches Torat Ilan Alav Torat Karka Alav. Torat Ilan Alav dehecha deakdesh o zeben shenei lanot v'hai yesh lo karka. Torat Karka Alav de la mizdaban agab ar'a. So these have the status both of just a regular tree, but they also have the status of land, meaning a separate piece of land, depending on the context. It has the status of a tree such that if someone consecrates or buys 2 trees and also this carob tree or this grown sycamore tree, then he also bought the land in between, because that's the general law. Just talking about regular trees, if you buy 2 trees, then you only get the 2 trees. If you consecrate 2 trees, you only consecrated the trees and not the land in between. But if it's 3 trees, then it's already considered an orchard, and you get the whole package, the trees and the land. Now, even if one of those 3 trees is this grown carob or grown sycamore, you might have thought that, oh, it's a significant in and of itself. This is like its own piece of land, its own piece of real estate, and doesn't combine with the other trees. Rav Huna teaches not so. It does combine, so it can act like just a regular tree. However, it also can stand alone, such that if I sell you a piece of land, then the sycamore tree and the carob tree are not part of the land. If they're little trees or other trees, then they come along with the land. But these are significant in and of themselves, as if it's a separate piece of land. Just like if I sold you this piece of land, you don't get the other. So too, if I sell you this piece of land, you don't get these particular trees. V'amar Rav Huna, Omer sheyesh bo satayim, Torat Omer alav veTorat Gadish alav, Torat Omer alav dishne Omarim shichcha, Shenayim vehu enan shichcha. Rav Huna teaches a similar law regarding a sheaf that is 2 se'ah big. So a sheaf of grain that's so big is significant in and of itself. And yet, it has the status of just a regular sheaf, and also the status of a heap that's very significant. What is this in reference to? To shichcha. Shichcha, the law shichcha is if I forget 1 or 2 sheaves out in the field, then I can't go back and collect it. I have to leave it for the poor. However, if I leave 3 in a row, then that means that's not forgotten. I just left them there. I'm going to come back for them later. So then that's not shichcha. Furthermore, there's another law that if it's very big, 2 se'ah big, then and I leave it out, even if it's just 1, that's not called shichcha. I can go back and get it because it's very significant in and of itself. And so both of these laws apply to this big sheaf. Torat Omer alav, it has the status of a regular sheaf. Dishnamrim shichcha, shnayim vehu enan shichcha. Because if I have 2 regular sized sheaves, that is shichcha, and I have to leave it for the poor. But if I have those 2 regular ones and this big one, then that's considered 3. So even though it's a very big one and is significant in and of itself, it does combine with 2 others to make a series of 3. And the other law is also true. Torat Gadish alav ditnan Omer sheyesh bo satayim shechacho and shichcha. It also has the status of a heap, a very big bundle, as we learned in the Mishnah in Pe'ah. that if there's a sheaf that contains 2 se'ah of grain and you forget it in the field, that's not called forgotten because it's so significant, then you have a right to go and get it back. And lastly, and we'll close out the 4th perek. Amar Rabba bar Hana Amar Resh Lakish Haruba Murka v'Sadan HaShikma Banu leMachloket Rabbi Menachem bar Yoseh v'Rabbanan. Rabba bar Hana says in the name of Resh Lakish that when it comes to these 2 trees, a grafted carob or a sycamore tree, if I consecrate a whole field, do these trees also get consecrated along with the field, or do I keep these trees? That is subject to a machloket between the Rabbi Menachem bar Yoseh and Rabbanan. Rabbi Menachem bar Yoseh says that they are not consecrated. I consecrated the field and only the field, and I keep the trees. Whereas Rabbanan say that once I consecrate the field, I consecrate everything on it as well, and that includes these trees too. Now we ask about Resh Lakish's statement. Velema machloket Rabbi Shimon veRabbanan. Why did Resh Lakish say that this is subject to machloket between Rabbi Menachem bar Yoseh and Rabbanan? Why doesn't he make reference to our Mishnah? Because this is a machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbanan. Actually, it's not exactly our Mishnah, because we said that Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah is only arguing aliba the Rabbanan, but Rabbi Shimon himself, that's what we're talking about. So actually, Resh Lakish could have taught us this very point, that Rabbi Shimon himself has a different opinion as the one recorded in the Mishnah. We derived that earlier because we said who is the author of this baraita, and we had to go through a whole argument to figure out that Rabbi Shimon says otherwise. But why didn't Shakish tell us that this is a machloket? Instead of telling us about what Rabbi Menachem bar Yoseh says, why not say this is machloket between Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbanan? And then I would know that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai thinks that when someone consecrates, he does it in a very stingy way, and he keeps only gives the land, but keeps the trees for himself, and therefore keeps even the land under the trees for himself. Whereas Rabbanan say, no, he's generous and he gives everything along with it. Why didn't Shakish teach it in Rabbi Shimon's name? And the answer is, Hakamash Malan, Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yoseh, Rabbi Shimon Sebir Aleh. So he does one better. He actually now teaches us that Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yoseh is of the same opinion as Rabbi Shimon. They both think that when someone consecrates land, he does so in a stingy way. And I said land. Good, I'm happy to consecrate the land. That's already generous enough. And he doesn't consecrate any part of it, not the cistern, not even the trees, and not the land under the trees. And so by telling us that Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Menachem bar Yoseh, and we know that Rabbi Shimon also disagrees with Rabbanan, so then we can figure out that the equation, that they both follow the same opinion, so we learn even more. I think that probably Resh Lakish is early Amorah. Probably this statement that he said is earlier than the previous part of the sugya. And actually, based on this, we know that Rabbi Shimon himself must think that someone who consecrates keeps the trees for himself. And it's probably based on this that the Gemara earlier went to that baraita that was anonymous. Look, it's an anonymous baraita. It doesn't have to be Rabbi Shimon. It could be someone else entirely. But focused on that baraita and says who was the author in order to attribute to Rabbi Shimon, in order to get to this conclusion, so that the very same conclusion that we know from Resh Lakish's statement, the Gemara earlier was able to figure it out through trying to know the attribution of that baraita. Hadran alach hamocher et habayit.